because people work for people they like. And no, I wanted nothing to do with the family business for many, many, many years. If I lose, and I truly lost to a competitor, I'm perfectly fine with that. I feel like there's a lot of shady stuff that happens in it. I don't think people look ahead and really see you're degrading your own industry.
Welcome to The Growth Switch, the podcast where we dive into the strategies, struggles, and breakthroughs of bold business leaders. I'm your host, Jules Fox, growth strategist and lead content creator at Aries Media. I'm here to uncover how today's top brands are scaling, overcoming challenges, and unlocking sustainable success. For those of you just tuning in, Aries Media helps grow successful brands with comprehensive, hands-on support for sales, business development, and performance marketing. Drop growth into the comments if you would like how to learn how to do that. Now, today we have a very special guest, Haley Crum, JD, president of FrankCrum, and a visionary leader in outsourced HR and staffing solutions. She's leveraging her legal expertise, leadership, and a people-first philosophy to drive business growth and community impact across nearly 50 states. Haley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be on.
Yeah, of course. It's really wonderful to have you on a guest. I really appreciate your time coming here today. And, to start with, let's get into your family legacy. You work for the company you work with. How did this work out? Were you asked to be a part of the company? Were you a part of the formulation of the company?
Yeah, great question. Actually, no, I was not a part of it. It actually started in 1981 before I was even born. I was born a year later. It was started by my dad and grandfather. During its inception was actually a staffing firm. So my grandfather wanted to start staffing, and my dad was out of the area at the time working for Olson Temporary Services in Orlando. So he quit his job and moved here to Clearwater to start a staffing firm, Great American Temporary Services, with my dad. Long story short, fast forward, started a PEO late 80s, started our own insurance company in 2000. And then in 2009, started our insurance agency. And no, I wanted nothing to do with the family business for many, many, many years, and was actually a chef by trade before coming here. So in 2007, after my grandfather passed away in 2006, my dad would come by my restaurant intermittently and ask if I was ready to join the business. And it took him about a year, but he talked me into it. And I told him, fine, I will come and I'll give it a shot. I was actually so afraid of sitting behind a desk just because I like to be moving. I like to get up and walk around, and it just didn't really seem appealing to me. But I told him I didn't want to work directly for him, and I wanted to start at the bottom. So I started as a customer service rep and just worked my way up. And I've been here 18 years as of last month.
Oh, wow.
So Frank is my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as a former restaurateur myself, I used to own organic fast food, and I feel like that's a young person's game. I was in my mid-20s and I had the energy and the bandwidth for that, and I loved it. And I'm also so glad I'm not doing it right now.
Same.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could lift stock pots like I did back then. I look back and I'm like, gosh, that was my dad essentially was my angel, because I'm almost 43 and I'm like, there's no way I couldn't be on my feet all day.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of similarities though, because, a lot of times in a restaurant, we come up with a recipe and, you follow this recipe for success. And in the business world, maybe this sounds a bit like cliche or something like that, but you also have these SOPs and you figure out a recipe for success. So in that regard, what are some of the recipes that you use in your business to succeed?
Yeah. I think this doesn't just apply to staffing or one of the business sectors that we're in. Enterprise at large, I feel like it's always got to be people before profits, number one. So if you don't take care of your greatest resource, which are my staff, when I first started here, we had 175 employees, and now we have close to 550. And we have, employees spread out across the U.S., most are in Clearwater. But everyone's different and should be treated differently. So I feel like really the game changer for us is the fact that we are family owned and operated. I know that sounds kind of like, everybody says that, but I think it really makes a difference when you're in the human business. Staffing is definitely human facing. We're dealing with people all day long. So if I can't take care of the ones that are at home, internally, then I have no business placing somebody at somebody else's business or offering them HR advice. So we try to practice what we preach, and like I said, everybody's motivated differently. I wake up in the morning and I want to come to work. To me, that's intrinsic. I don't have to get paid for that. It's just something that I was born with. Yeah. Others want recognition. Others want time off or flex time. Others want a bonus. So it really just, I think, boils down to hiring the best people that you can and giving them the battle cry and trying to stay out of their way. I can tend to make a mess of things if I give the power away and then try to take it back later, which is kind of human nature.
Yeah. But in that human nature, I think that you're absolutely right in saying that, in a human-based field, this family legacy is so important. This legacy that has been passed along from generation to generation to keep it in the family, you are also passing on legacies by helping people expand their business, by helping people fill the roles that are most needed to grow their own business and create their own legacy. So your legacy is in turn enhancing and helping to further create their legacy.
Yeah, I agree totally. And one of the mottos that I live by, and it helps me out, is I like to try to leave people in a better position than when I found them. And that can be applicable to really anything, whether it's your family or your friends or your kids. What can I do to make this person's life just a little bit easier? And some days that's a lot harder than others.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I bet. As a fellow parent, I mean, I feel like parenting and business, like you could say that about your kids, you could say that about your business,
Yeah, both have kids. Both need to be like taken care of, and there's some days where you're gonna have to like take the ace bandage out and wrap them up and send them on their way. I get it.
Yeah. And at some point, with your own past history in mind of having a father who really changed the trajectory of your life, you may end up being that keystone person in your own kids' lives to help them out with their legacy and say, hey, I know you love doing what you're doing right now, and I support it 1000%. And also, here's another opportunity that's possible. Just think on it,
Yeah. Well, he, at the time, was 24. And so I don't know that I viewed it as like a help. It was more of a hindrance. If I'm being honest, like I was like, why is this guy bothering me? Like, I was living on my own at that point. I wanted to do everything myself, including like pay for my first condo by myself. I didn't want I just, for some reason, I had this like crusade of wanting to differentiate. And it's funny how the older you get, the more like, I'm tethered to that man's side and would do anything for him. And he's still very active in the business. And I'm still to this day learning so much from him.
That's amazing. So yeah, awesome family-driven success story. So, what you guys do, how is it different than what other people are bringing to the market at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, especially in our market, but a lot of different markets. So I'm not saying we're unique on any level. There's a lot of cannibalism that's going on in the staffing industry, meaning like larger companies eating up and purchasing smaller companies, and they're like bankrolling different logos. So the logos, especially of the big staffing firms or the big PEOs, like Adecco, or in the PEO space, you've got TriNet and a lot of the big boys that are just, that's all they do is they have a whole section of people that just continue to acquire different smaller companies. I think our approach to things is vastly different, starting with the baseline of, we won't ever have any external partners. We're not looking for PE funds or VC funds right now. We want to keep it in the family. We view this as a legacy business, like meaning, my brother and I have kids, and we want, as it stands right now, for this business to be substantially better than when we took it over. That's hand off to our children when they're old enough, should they decide to like come work for us. If not, no harm, no foul. But, I think that kind of gives us a very strong foothold and a baseline to start off from, because it's personal to us. It's not just a transaction where we're trying to increase the top line, make sure the bottom line's growing substantially just to turn around and flip it.
Yeah.
So I'm vested.
Yeah. And I think that resonates with your audience as well. For a lot of people, if you have started your own business, if you're hiring for your company because you're growing your company, it is deeply personal to you. This is it. Yes, at the end of the day, it's just business and it's a numbers game. But for a lot of people, the business is their legacy, and they have their own families and their own kids that they're thinking of passing stuff down to as well. So they're growing that, and you are becoming a part of their legacy and helping them.
Yeah. It's, I think we have a really good team too. There's always like, of course, you got to take like, it's what, the 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule. I've heard a bunch of different ones thrown out there, but I think it's really who you hire. I've hired some doozies that I look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, not in a good way. Like, and I've learned some really, really hard lessons that have, really just attach themselves to me, and I pray I never make the same, and I think as entrepreneurs and business people, we all make those mistakes. It's just like what you do with that mistake and how you like learn and move forward. But I think one of the biggest things that we do is we try to always do the right thing regardless. And, me personally, I love my sleep. I don't get a lot of it with kids, but, I don't want to ever have to remember, what was I dishonest about? What didn't I say to the staff internally that I should have just been transparent? I don't know. I know that's kind of a generic response, but it has nothing to do with pricing or having some like state of the art like technology. We have that. That's great. But I think it really boils down to like what you're doing and what you do for your staff and your extended family.
But that honesty could be a breath of fresh air. And especially when you're working with somebody, those hard-earned lessons that you've learned in your own life and for yourself, you can pass on to other people in the form of wisdom, in the form of like, I actually have been through this and I know what to look out for, which means I know how to look out for you and help protect you.
Yeah, the workforce has definitely changed though. And I'm sure I sound just like my dad and grandfather sounded when I was like a young person. And it's so crazy to watch this things evolve. We've got like the baby boomers like aging out, and there's this huge gap in the population of the workforce. And it's pretty daunting if you look forward and you focus on that, because who's going to do the work? It's kind of like watching like, like a tragedy coming your way and you're like, well, how do I fix this? AI is great, but what does the future look like? Are we going to be talking to robots all day, or are you and I going to be able to like have a podcast like this 10 years?
Yeah, hopefully so. Now you do have some pretty strong opinions on light industrial and staffing and the disappearing of some of these things. So I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on that, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think AI plays a very significant part in what the workforce and workforce development is going to look like even a year from now, even right now. Developing and progressing at such a rapid pace. I don't know that any human can really keep their finger on the pulse 100% like we used to be able to. Like I remember hearing it saying sort of, but I wasn't in business when the fax machine came out, right? It was one thing, it did one job and it sent a message over, and it has, so if you compare the fax machine or even like the rollout of Google, this is like exponentially greater, and it will, I think, have long lasting effects. But the fact of the matter is you're always going to need that human element, because people work for people they like. So for me, at least, I love to talk and I love to engage with people like yourself, and I like to learn. I want to hear your perspective, and I can't do that with a robot or an engine that's running in the background.
No, of course, they'll just say, what perspective would you like me to have? That's
right.
Yeah.
But, with light industrial specifically, you've got wage inflation. 2 years ago, we booked, I think, a 20% growth in wages just in our PEO book of business alone. So that's roughly almost 100,000 employees, that we payroll for. I mean, a 20% wage growth in 1 year, it's just, you can't, it's not sustainable. So and of course, that's going to continue if the population in the workforce continues to decrease. So who's going to do the work, right?
Right.
You have some political plays also in the background. E-Verify. You have the government with all of this, these ICE things. And I will keep the politics on the side, but it's definitely not helping the situation of needing numbers and people who do the work. Additionally, I think the light industrial staffing firm or a field is going to have to basically take their legacy value proposition and flip it on its head. Because what's to say that you and I don't start a staffing firm today and create an AI agent and subscribe to a few different, job boards and throw that agent on top? And if you have workers' comp and a state unemployment account, then you're good to go. Why would you ever need a staffing firm?
Right.
That's the scary part.
Right. Yeah. And I think cannibalistic was an interesting word that you used earlier that I've never heard anybody use that word, but I think it's so accurate. And I think that like, just to bring that point back around of just like, yes, if everybody's, with the disappearing of those jobs, there are the disappearing of the upper level jobs as well as AI starts to do something marginally well enough to get the job done. Are you willing to put up with the somewhat lack of humanism, and it might if you looked only at the numbers and you said, oh, well, it's a cost savings. But is it a cost savings? Like, is the AI going to make actual recommendations based on what it feels? Because it doesn't feel anything. So it's going to make recommendations based on an algorithm, and people aren't algorithms. So you might end up, looking like it's going to save you some money, but it might come up with some huge heartache and headache as well,
Yeah. Well, to your point, humans aren't, made out of algorithms. So we actually feel things. And, I don't know. Something tells me that, like, just like anything else, like if you look at like the difference of the workforce and this, what COVID did for like hybrid and remote workers, right? So the pendulum swung way far right. Everybody wanted to be remote. And now, like, the government's being called back into the office. So the pendulum's swinging way left. I think the same will probably be true with AI. I think right now we're in the thick of it. And I think 1 or 2 years down the road, I think maybe we'll land somewhere in the middle where we're more efficient than we were. I mean, Google definitely helped the business community because we were more efficient. But when Google came out, like, the world was ending.
Yeah.
We're going to have no jobs, and the libraries, like, no one's going to visit them because they're all going to look up on Google, like, what the answer is. But we're still going to libraries, and I don't think the world has changed that much.
Yeah. I mean, and even the Google founders' children going to tech-free schools, going to like the Waldorf schools and doing the tech-free, like no iPads. And you're like, oh, okay, no, that was a false prediction.
I don't know. I think it's a helpful tool. I think right now the biggest thing that we can offer in the staffing industry is that human touch. Even MIT, I've taken a couple of one-off courses from MIT online. I got a update on some classes that are upcoming, and one of them is talking about in the title, the human touch during like the decade of AI, and I'm like, that would be really interesting, actually. The fact that
sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that they've already presented or created like curriculum for these classes, I'm like, we're already swinging backwards.
Yeah, and good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were to be able to, if we're looking at the growth trajectory of your business, hey, we're faced with some uncertain times right now. We're faced with some really interesting, unique policies. We're faced with the disappearance of certain things. We're faced with this, price spikes and hikes and all kinds of things across the board. That's a lot of challenges. If there was one thing that you could do to grow your company, if you had a magic wand and you could just be like, I'm going to take care of this one thing so that we can just grow our company sustainably and profitably, what would you take care of?
That is a great question, and a very hard one, actually. One thing, if I could create like a fair business, like competitive atmosphere across the United States, like among companies, like where people did the right thing, like I'm very competitive in nature, and so is my family. Yeah. If I lose, and I truly lost to a competitor, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm going to look back at that loss and I'm going to be like, what did we do wrong? And we're going to, take a post-mortem and see how we can improve. Yeah. But I feel like, especially in staffing, anybody, there's no threshold to entry. Not like the PEO industry. We're not a licensed and regulated, business model. I feel like there's a lot of shady stuff that happens in it. I don't think people look ahead and really see like you're degrading your own industry. It might be that right now, like, you're going to undercut the competition in price, and then you'll go in the back door and you'll raise it again. So you're just trying to like basically logo shop and take people's business instead of really just going out and like actually competing. So if I had to change one thing, I would like flatten the playing field. The guys that show up today and undercut the rest of the competition that's been here for 44 years, including myself, we have staying power and a very strong logo. So you might have saved that client for like this week or next week, but when you go out of business because you didn't price it right, we're still going to be in the wings, and the client's going to eventually come back. But they probably will be a lot more gun shy because of the games that you played with them. Yeah. So that's probably my takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thing to fix, and that was a pretty tricky question.
What? I was like, dang, just one thing?
Yeah, well, I know, top 3.
Where did I start?
Yeah. So if people do you work with clients across the U.S. or do you have like a niche?
Yeah. So with staffing, it's regional, and we're mostly like industrial and administrative. On the PEO side, national. We're in all 50 states. Matter of fact, we just got for FrankCrum Insurance accepted in the state of California, so which is really exciting. It's a hard state to get into.
The big one. Yeah.
It's a very big one.
Yeah.
But we really focus on smaller, like 1 to 25, 1 to 50 employer, like contractors is really where our sweet spot has been. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is on the PEO side, they have immediately access to Fortune 500 benefits. They can focus on what they do best. So a lot of these are like take for instance, electricians, right? So they went into business because they're good at, fixing like electrical components or installing different electric modalities at homes, commercial, whatever. They're not great at HR. Yeah. And if they're a startup, they might have 1, 2, 3 employees. Well, the laws really aren't triggered until you hit like 25 for E-Verify or 40 for FMLA. So as the bigger you get, the more, the government has their hands in legislation, et cetera. And God forbid you start in Florida and go to California next week.
Right.
Because everything changes so drastically. Mm-hmm. So having a PEO by your side really keeps those people in compliance, but also allows them to have free cash flow, but then not worry about, the HR legislation. Because it's just, it would be really cool one day to like quantify how many dollars are spent on really taking a look at the changing legislation and breaking it down into like layman's terms and then distributing it back out to companies that need to comply.
Yeah. Big time. So how can people get a hold of you, viewers? If you're tuning in right now, we will go ahead and have some links down below. Haley, go ahead and tell us how people can get in touch with you if they want to do business with you.
Sure.
To get the human touch.
The human touch. Yeah.
The human touch.
Anyone can email me or give me a shout. The office number is 727-726-2786 or 726-CRUM, which is kind of cool. I thought that they snapped that back in the 80s and we still have that number.
Nice.
But I'm always here. My dad still comes into work at 76 every day.
Yeah. Hey, there's a person who's passionate about what they do. And it's like you said, like, I'm actually excited to go to work. And that was 1,000% relatable. I actually love what I do and I'm excited to go to work every day.
You have a much cooler job than I do. I'm actually sitting here a little bit with like FOMO, like that would be a really fun job. I would love to talk to people all day about just like their specialty. Talk about different perspectives.
Yeah. Cool. It is. It's fun. You could do it. You actually could have your own podcast. And you could introduce yourself and you could talk to, people in the area, especially just, interview the people and just like let them have their say and then let them know what you do as well, how you can help. It's this virtuous cycle. Like, we're here to help, showcase you and your talents and your thought leadership and your insights. And yeah, super happy to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much, Haley.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.